All right, so welcome aboard. This is part two of a two-part Zoom conference. A couple of days ago, we had the first one, which was on content analysis, thematic analysis, and discursive psychology. Now, I have a disclaimer here. Unfortunately, discursive psychology was something that I could not cover in that session, and nor will I be able to cover in this session. The reason for that is discursive psychology becomes a whole different tangential topic. And maybe at some point down the road, I may have a separate workshop on discursive. It's a whole different animal by itself. It somehow doesn't fit in. I have no idea why I put discursive psychology in there. But anyway, we will at some point cover that. But this is going to be totally about grounded theory, okay? Like always, now you're familiar with my drill that rather than me telling you what grounded theory is, I want you to tell me what grounded theory is, okay? What do you understand by grounded theory? When I say that, I'm not putting pressure on you. I'm only trying to understand what are your meanings in your mind about what constitutes grounded theory. Okay, so let's begin. Kanika, if you want to just you know the drill. You hold your hands up, and Kanika will take you one at a time.
Yes. So just a quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just keep yourself on mute unless you have something to say or ask a question. You have two options. You could either unmute yourself and just ask a question straight away. We'll try and cue you all and ask the questions. And it's going to take a couple of pauses in between in every segment and just allow some questions and answer those so that it'll be interactive. You can also alternatively put the questions or thoughts or anything on the chat box. I'll be checking that all along. Anything that you want to clap on or just your thumbs up or raise your hand, ask a question. We all know it's there in the where you find the chat box. You also have those emoticons on the top, and you can just find that and just keep it interactive with your emoticons.
Right. And there's a couple of reasons why we want to keep the interactive sessions going. We don't want Zara to go off to sleep. Okay. So sometimes I'll call upon Zara, sometimes I'll call upon Sakshi, someone I'll call upon Kanika. You know, we want to keep this an interactive session. On the other hand, one of the other reasons, probably more important reason than that, is if you're not interacting, you're not experiencing, you're only hearing. And only hearing is only one part of learning. Experiencing something by doing something, doing as in asking questions, bring your inquiry into it and have a dialogue, will enhance your learning more than just sitting back and relaxing and saying, oh boy, this is so much fun. I can just relax and just listen to this whole thing without interacting. So we'll keep this interactive. We'll keep doing segments and make this a lot of fun, because grounded theory can be a very boring approach, a very tedious, rigorous approach to doing analysis and doing qualitative research. So I want to make it a lot of fun for you guys. Okay. All right. So my first question is, what is grounded theory? Okay. Well, what is this word grounded? Iman, go ahead.
Yes, for me, I think grounded theory is something from which we actually generate or base our new knowledge. Like we can, the data, already existing data could be used to generate a new theory or a new domain. For example, I think APA was constructed by grounded theory. Like the whole system came from there when you collected a lot of data, and then you came to a system, a new systematic way to handle data. So I think that's grounded theory.
Okay, good. Thank you. So what is grounded theory? And who else wants to go?
Okay, sir, I think I'll answer. Does anyone else want to answer, or I go ahead?
No, go ahead.
I'll go after you.
Thoughts from Apurva as well.
Okay. Okay, okay, sure. So my understanding of grounded theory is that I think the theory is developed after the data collection, like after we collect the data, and that is where the that's wh- that is where we after the data collection process we develop the theory. So it's an inductive approach to research where we collect the data first, and then the data. I think the
Friend,
term
family, or
counted
friend,
comes
same.
from this thing only.
You
The
have to
data,
put
the
this.
theory comes from the data itself. So I think I made myself clear, or I'm fumbling a bit over here.
That's okay. You're
It-
making this is as clear as mud. Okay, no, just kidding, just kidding. This is you made a very good attempt. The only area where I would like you to keep in mind is that it's not a linear process. That means first you collect the data, then you develop a theory, and then you do this, and then you do that. It's an iterative process. Okay, there's a lot of
oh,
iteration means repetition, going back and forth, back and forth. Okay, number one. Number two, it's also very recursive, which is also another way of saying, you hear the word recursive in mathematics, but it's also sort of repetition. Okay, connecting the dots. So please just remember that it's not that the theory is going to completely emerge or completely develop after you've collected all the data. The theory is somewhat developing as you, the adverb, developing as you're collecting the data, as you're doing the interviews, as you analyzing and going back and forth. Something is happening. It's unfolding in your mind. It may be just ideas about the theory. It may be a theoretical framework. So it's important to understand. So if you go with the notion that, oh, I'm only going to develop the development data collect karna, after that I'm going to go collect the theory, you will miss out on this nuance. It's an ongoing, it's an iterative, organic process of development. It's an emergent process of development. Yeah. Okay. All right. Who else
all
wants to
right,
go?
sir, clear. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Sure.
much.
We have a thought from Apurva. He's mentioned
Yeah.
it there
So
chat as well, but go ahead.
yeah. So I was thinking that grounded theory, as I understand it, is where the researcher goes in ideally without any preconceived notions. And instead of looking at whatever data and phenomena you find, instead of looking at it from where the researcher is situated, you actually try to look at it from where it is grounded, from where it is emanating in some sense. Be as blank and try to understand it as it is rather than as you
Okay.
preconceive.
Okay. So you bring in a very important notion that you bring in a notion that there's no preconceived notions there. That's also a
Yeah.
notion. There are no preconceived notions. You don't approach this inquiry or this method with preconceived ideas. Okay. Um, yeah, that's great. That's a good attempt. So who, and very right, you rightfully said. Who else wants to go?
Sakshi. Sakshi, go for it.
Sakshi, go ahead.
I think we just lost her. Probably. Okay.
Yeah,
Go
am
ahead.
I audible?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
you
go
are.
ahead, Sakshi. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would just like to add to what already has been mentioned. So, grounded theory, in what I believe is, it is grounded in the data. The theory
Ah,
is now grounded in the
beautiful.
data.
Yeah, yeah.
So, hence it is called grounded theory.
Very. Let's give her a virtual round of applause. Okay. That is amazing. That is what the basic foundation of grounded theory is. It is founded, it is grounded in data. Okay. Right. So everything that you're doing, all the processes, all the methodologies, all the methods that are unfolding from the data alone. You're not looking at the world outside. You're not looking at your own thoughts, paradigms, and such. You're looking at what is in the data, what is emerging out of the data. So that's a really good attempt. Who else wants to go?
We don't have any other thoughts or
Okay.
people who've raised their hands. So,
All right. So great. So let's see. So there are three things that you'll often hear about, but don't get confused. These are just acronyms. These are different approaches. These are different authors that are attached to this. So don't get confused. Don't make the whole process very fuzzy for yourself. Just remember the grounded theory method, the GTM, was the original that was developed by Glaser and Strauss. You'll hear the word Glaser and Strauss. And if you go into the online folder, I don't know if I shared the online folder. I have an online folder of a tremendous amount of resources there, articles, ebooks, and things of that nature. So if I'm not shared that, I will share that with you via email. And you can go into the folder, and as long as you just respect the fact that this is copyrighted material and really ought not to be shared outside of your community. All right, it should not be shared. It should be really for your own private consumption only. All right, if you want to share something outside of your institution, just shoot me an email, and I'll be very happy to make that arrangement. But please respect that. All right. So the substantive grounded theory, you'll hear that also. What is substantive grounded theory? Now, typically, grounded theory approaches can have two prongs. One is that you are only researching, collecting data, researching on one particular field. Let's say you're doing researching aviation. All your work, all your thinking, the theories, the concepts, everything are coming from aviation. So you're totally drenched in that one specialized area. That is substantive grounded theory. Formal grounded theory, on the other hand, right, is abstract concepts. So you can go outside of your field to see what else is out there. Okay, and you're collecting data from a number of different sources. So it becomes a richer way of developing a theory or refining a new theory. Okay, so just remember that. Now, you'll also hear the word constructivism or constructivist grounded theory. That is attributed to a very renowned theorist called Kathy Sharmaz. Kathy, K-A-T-H-Y, and Sharmaz, C-H-A-R-M-A-Z. Okay, she created this constructivist approach. Now, what is constructivist? So constructivist is how people construct and how they, so it's a social construction. If you all know the meaning of social construction, how reality is constructed, how ideas and thoughts are constructed by human beings. All right. So as you're constructing those ideas and thoughts, what you're sharing with the researcher also becomes powerful data. Okay. So Kathy Sharma is actually the contemporary grounded theorist. Okay. Beautiful book she has written. You can certainly look those up. I believe I may have Kathy Sharma's book on constructing grounded theory. It's a complete ebook. I'd be very happy to share that. As a matter of fact, I'll drop it into that folder so you folks can read that. All right. So just remember that these are just acronyms. Grounded theory method, original method that was developed by Glaser and Strauss. Substantive theory in a very specialized field, and you only in that field. And formal grounded theory is a lot of abstraction from different fields and such. Okay. Okay, so let me go to the next one, if I can. Right, sometimes it freezes up. I wonder why. Okay, all right, so let's see. Okay, all right, so how would you define grounded theory? That is one part, one question that comes up. What is the meaning of, because if you don't know the definition of what you're doing or what you're researching as a topic, then you are not really a solid researcher. You have to be able to define what you're doing. What is it grounded in, which some of you just answered? It is grounded in the data. Okay. All of the work that you're doing is grounded in the data. In the data meaning all through the interviews and focus groups or content. And yesterday, a couple of days, we talked about content analysis, which is more of, it's a descriptive approach, but more quantifiable. So just remember you can use inductive and deductive methods, both for data collection in grounded theory, okay? Depending upon what you're using, all right? So what is it grounded in? We spoke. What is the objective in pursuing grounded theory? Why were Glaser and Strauss so eager to change the research landscape? They were the originators. This Glaser and Strauss, I'm hovering my cursor here, just so you guys know. They were the founders, the fathers of grounded theory. And then, of course, Corbin came in later, Kathy Sharma's, and other theorists have come and they have their own approaches. But just remember, it's kind of like, Sigmund Freud was the father of psychoanalysis. And there have been many psychoanalysts, both contemporary and classic, that have come after Freud. And they tried to put a spin on something new, but it keeps going back to Freud's original theories, okay, and his original observations. And so just remember that the original was Glaser and Strauss, but others have come and changed the research landscape. Now, the objective in pursuing grounded theory, there are two objectives. One, you're seeing an area, you're seeing a gap in the literature, and you're curious, it's keeping you up at night, all right? So what you're after is developing a new theory or refining an existing theory. So you're either developing a brand new theory, which is a tough job, let me tell you. If you think of something, in all likelihood, somebody has already done work in that area, okay? And now, so refining is as good a pursuit in grounded theory. So you're looking at a theory, but you're not satisfied that it properly addresses all the concerns that you have around a phenomena. By the way, everything is around a phenomena. Your research phenomena, your research question is based on the phenomena, all right? So the objective is to either develop a brand new theory or refining an existing theory. Both are totally okay pursuits, all right? Let's see. So grounded theory, let's talk about some important constructs that we have also discussed in the past Zoom session, but let me just go over this. It is an inductive approach. What is induction? Induction means from specific to general. It starts with specific cases. So when you're doing grounded theory, and by the way, phenomenology is also an inductive approach. So if you're doing grounded theory, phenomenology, you're starting with specific cases, specific interviews, and then doing a roll-up of the interviews in your analysis and developing some sort of a general observation. Then this is not generalization as you think of in the context of quantitative studies. This is a different form. These are just general observation. You're not making general theories that can be applied to the whole population, all right? Deduction is the reverse. As I remember, I was showing you the funnel. The funnel is either this way. So induction is from specific, the top of the pyramid, down to general. And deduction is general, right, down to something specific. So in quantitative studies, you're testing the hypothesis. You're wondering if a theory that you applied, is it useful or not useful, and things of that nature. But that is not what you're doing in grounded theory. Now you'll hear a very, very interesting concept called abduction in grounded theory. Now this is not, hey, just so everybody knows, this is not alien abduction, like a spacecraft has descended on Earth and they're going to take everybody away, all right? Hey, just to be clear, don't tell anybody that, hey, Anil said abduction, that means the spacecrafts are all getting ready to descend on Earth. That is not what abduction, just to make it clear. So what is abduction in the context of grounded theory? It starts with an observation, okay? So you're making, as you're doing interviewing, you're observing the data as this is coming through. So by the way, just those of you that are also familiar with phenomenology, phenomenology is a very active co-creation of knowledge, which is also the case in grounded theory. But in grounded theory, the theorist or not the theorist, but the researcher has to have a very keen eye to observe. Because as data is emerging, as people are talking, there's a great deal of observation also happening. So the researcher starts with an observation, makes an observation about something, then attempts to find the simplest, most plausible explanations. So you're looking at a general observation, then you're trying to attempt to make the simplest, most plausible explanation. How can something be explained in its simplest way, in the simplest way? So this is not about taking something simple and making it complicated. Our human tendency is in education to take something very, very simple and make it so complicated and bombastic that the students are just sleeping in your class and they don't want to show up in your next class again. Okay. All right. So just remember that it considers all possible theoretical explanations for the data, forms hypotheses for each. Now, this is something you will hear not in phenomenology. In phenomenology, you never hear about theories, hypotheses, and things of that nature. Okay, you will hear hypotheses in this because you could be starting with a hypothesis. You have some formulation in your head that there's an area that is not being pursued in the literature. How best can you approach that area? And what kind of course of action can be taken toward that? All right. So grounded theory is a systematic methodology in the social sciences. Don't think it is just all the dots out there and somehow you have to connect all the dots, and when the heck are you going to be able to do that? It's a systematic approach. It's a very systematized methodology in the social sciences, involving the construction of theory, all right, of what is grounded in the research data itself. So we are repeating the same thing. So you're constructing the theory out of the data that is you're collecting, the data that is coming forth, right? It's not from outside. It all is grounded in the data itself. So grounded theory is in and about the data, all right? It does not seek grand theories that may not have anything to do with a particular study. So you may have, let me give you an example, all right? And somebody had used this pen or something to do this. Can you please remove this line here? All right, it's a little distracting to the eye. You used an annotation, somebody used it. So if you would just, and if you were highlighting something, let me know, all right? So I can address that. But anyway, please take care of that. It does not seek to address grand theories that may not have anything. So if your study phenomena is something that you're looking at, so you're looking at academia, and within academia, you're looking at, say Montessori schools, all right? And you're trying to study the factors within a Montessori school that may have something to do with how students learn. So you're understanding the process of that, all right? You're not applying immediately. So the moment you go, you say, oh, so let me go into the literature and let me see who has written anything about that, right? And then you apply that and boom, the study is done. That is not grounded theory. Yes, a literature review is important, but traditionally, and I'm cautious as I say this, traditionally, the approach with grounded theory, which makes it different from all other approaches, is that you do not first go and look for literature. Okay? So you do not do a literature review first and then start your study. As a matter of fact, you're asked to not do the literature review first. All right? Let the literature review, bibliographies, and everything emerge at the end of the study. Now, with that said, some of you may be wondering, so if I don't have any idea about the literature, okay, because I don't want my my notions to be all colored by it, then how do I know what I'm researching? Or how do I know what I want to research? How do I know the theories that I want to develop? So you have to have some idea in your head about the study phenomena that you want to research. All right. So let's open this to this group and see what study phenomena comes to your mind. All of you have very fertile minds, and many of you are very much younger than me, and probably are seeing life through your own lenses and are intrigued by certain phenomena that is occurring. And so something that you want to develop or research or develop a theory around or refine a theory. So here's your chance to bring it up with a show of hands. Just any research phenomena. Let's talk about a research phenomenon. You don't have to be very specific. Share something that is intriguing to you.
We have some thoughts coming in.
Okay. Mitaksha has raised her hand. Yeah.
Okay, so Nanika has written effect of lockdown on family dynamics.
Okay. Effect of lockdown on family dynamics. So let's take that. Okay. All right. So the way I go about it is, and this may be interesting for the rest of the group also. So when a student says, I have this, so then I say, okay, was that Nanika who said that?
Yes, Nanika said that. She sent it to me.
So Nanika, why do you want to research that? Go ahead, Nanika.
Nanika, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, sir. So I personally did not come across a lot of researches on this topic, and I was interested in how the lockdown must have affected the bonds between families, because there was a general sense that some people have come together in the lockdown very closely, whereas some people thought that it's very toxic, like to be with your family and not have alone time. So there were these two angles to it.
Okay.
So yeah.
So what about this concept? So wait. She's not finished yet. So what about Danica? What about this research phenomena? Let's say the research topic or area that is interesting to you. Why does this interest you particularly?
Okay. So like if I talk about personally, so
yeah, I
I
want you
came
to talk
across
about personally. Yeah.
yeah. So I talked to a lot of people, and everyone had different conceptions. And I thought that the youth, like our age, they were definitely, they had something to contribute in this area. Like the effect of lockdown mainly for people of our age in their 20s was seen in either productivity or the family dynamics. So, but in terms of productivity, there was a common theme that that students were procrastinating more and etc. etc. But in terms of family dynamics, I thought it would be interesting to study how the lockdown has affected um, families. In what ways?
So okay. So now everybody, what Nanika is talking about is, and just to repeat what she said, what is the impact of the lockdown on family dynamics? And then I asked her to probe a little bit more. So the moment the thing becomes personal to you, your data, your ideas flow a little bit better because they're flowing from your own personal experience. And there's nothing greater than, no better teacher than your personal experience. So when you're talking about the family dynamics and you're talking about your younger age generation, I'm assuming you're probably in your early 20s. Is that correct, Nanika?
That's what she said.
Yes, sir.
Okay, in your early 20s. Okay, so because you're in the early 20s and you have other family members who are probably much older than you, so there's an intergenerational divide there. Okay, and you are trying to understand a causality, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So what is it that is causing this? Is it just the lockdown? What about the lockdown is causing that? Is it alienation? Is it intimacy? Because all of you are all the time together, so you can be more intimate with each other. Things that you never discussed earlier, you can now talk over family dinners because everybody's not rushed, right? A lot of people are working from home. And so you're trying to understand probably what are the factors that influence that dynamic. Correct?
Yes.
So you have to be very clear when you're doing grounded theory that you're looking at either the process that occurs or the factors that come into play for causality. One thing causing another. So what is the thing that is causing it? The lockdown, right? And what is the other entity? The dynamics that are occurring because. So there's a causality between that. All right. It's not a pure causality. It's not a correlation that the greater the lockdown, the more intimate will be people, or the greater the lockdown period, the more distanced they will be. That is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about something that is occurring in that process. Because there's a process occurring, correct? It's not just, okay, lockdown, intimacy, lockdown, alienation. Between the lockdown and the intimacy or alienation, there are processes occurring. And grounded theory studies those processes. So now let me ask you a question, Nanika. If you were to be attempting to do a grounded theory on this very phenomena, how would you go about recruiting people, and who would you recruit for your study? Because you have to have a purposive sample, correct? A sample with a purpose. So who would you recruit for your study?
Probably young adults, and also people from the older generation, like maybe the mothers.
Okay. Mothers,
Yeah.
uncles, fathers, grandfathers, even, right?
Because we have to capture, because if we are capturing family dynamics, then the sample should be representative of a family. So that's why we can take people from different age groups.
Very good. Excellent. By the way, thank you so much. I was probably expecting something a little less, but I have gotten a lot more from you by way of this, and I really commend you for that. So that's a great attempt at developing. See what we did. So you bring out a research topic, correct? But that research topic, it's not enough. You should not be satisfied with just that phenomena. You have to keep asking yourself question, why do I want to do that? Okay, then you ask them. Then you ask, why is it that you are interested in the alienation? Why is it that you are interested in the intimacy part? I mean, just saying that, oh, it's either alienation happening or intimacy happening, that's not enough. The question is why. Until you're able to answer the question why, as it pertains to a research question, you're not going to be able to drill down and collect the data in a way that's going to make sense to you. Okay. Now, I believe Kanika was Dr. K.S. Gupta wanting to say something.
Yes, and Iman also has her hand.
Yes, Professor.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
You have covered it.
Oh, see that?
Same thing I wanted to ask, that you don't be interested on 2 points, but interested in the journey, process.
In the process.
And how did it happen, and among or between whom?
Yes.
If you are taking 3 generations, let us say in family dynamics, all 3 generations, how did it differ and why?
Wonderful.
Why very much important? Then what? Thank you, Professor. Same thing I wanted to supplement.
That's good. Kanika, anybody else wanted to?
Yes, Iman.
Iman, go ahead.
Okay, so I had a query which I've forgotten because I was waiting. You were talking about causality, like the cause of something.
Causality.
And then you were causality, and then you were talking about a transition, like how it's working. So
Correct.
I am not very clear about the difference between both, because as far as like her research is concerned, what I think, not only the lockdown could be a cause, it can also be the financial pressure that has been there. So
Oh,
and that
absolutely.
that actually is then that is actually then further it depends on the type of personality a person adheres to, because some
Absolutely.
can take pressure well and sometimes some people don't. So
Correct.
there are multiple reasons that could affect how a relationship is being built during COVID-19, not only the lockdown
Absolutely.
itself.
No, 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 no.
uh,
Totally. And that's and so if everybody heard Iman, so it's not just lockdown causes this. Okay, so what about the lockdown? Is it just lockdown? You put a lock and then everything else is happening? What does the lockdown stir up in the economy, in you, in your dynamics? That is important. Like you brought up the idea of the financial problems. People are not able to go to work, right? They get irritable. A lot of people, and by the way, let's not forget, a lot of people are depressed right now. Okay, they may not admit it, right? Kanika, you're shaking your head. I think you agree that a lot of
Yep.
people are feeling depressed and they're not able to express the depression. That's why there's a huge outburst right now happening for people seeking that.
Yeah, I think people are also missing the distraction. So, that concentrated attention to a certain thing and no escape from that is
Mhm.
something probably which is a cause as well. So, just like you say that we look at the phenomena and then we look at the factors. So, both the things, they are like interesting correlation there.
Yes, very true. So go ahead, finish your thought, Iman.
okay, I one thing, like the causes I was talking about, I wanted to ask, it was not clear for me, the causality, like the causes, what's the difference between the transition and the when we are looking for causes, because I don't know why, but I'm not very clear.
Okay.
My
Okay.
concept is not clear on this.
All right. Okay. So, okay. Very good. Very, very good question. Please don't get locked in. Don't get locked down with the notion thinking that grounded theory is only about causality. A lot of people start to think that, now, yes, causality is a very important factor because if you look at the same research phenomena, okay, and you create a research question around that, depending upon the kind of research question you ask, a different methodology may come into play. The moment grounded theory comes into play is when we are looking for factors. Factors doesn't always mean one thing is causing another. Factors can be part of a process that is occurring, a process that is unfolding. Okay, so even if we take causality, let's say this thing causing this, right? Remember, we are not looking at causality in terms of a quantitative study. Causality in quantitative studies is different than the causality that I'm talking about here in inductive grounded theory, which is an inductive approach to qualitative research. So when I say processes that are occurring, right? They're occurring because of something that's going on. There's a mitigating factor there. So we are not just necessarily looking at correlation of this with this and this with this. We are looking at, if this is happening, what is the process that is unfolding? How are people making sense, making meaning out of that? Don't confuse with phenomenology, by the way. Okay.
Okay.
How are people making sense, and how are they interacting and going about their daily lives? Go ahead, Iman.
So are you talking about mediators?
Say that again.
Like what mediating variables are being used? Are you talking about mediators? Like what mediating variables are being used?
So what mediating variables are being used? What is occurring within that process that you want to understand? Because this is a very in-depth approach. Process that, and by the way, this is where grounded theory is so different from other forms like phenomenology, which makes sense and studies the phenomena, is in grounded theory, you will have charts, and I will show you in my presentation later, how you develop mind maps, develop charts, frameworks for understanding something diagrammatically rather than just abstraction. Okay? And this is where, that's why some people get confused that is grounded theory really a qualitative approach or is it a quantitative approach? Because it's very scientifically driven. Okay, so more on that later, but thank you for asking that question. So it is an inductive approach to doing research. We know that. Now, grounded theory concepts, unlike
Just
traditional method. Yeah, go
there are
ahead.
a couple of other people, Anil,
Oh,
in case
yeah.
if you want.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's
Yeah, go ahead.
Siddhi, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Hi. So, in terms of qualitative research, like my biggest doubt is how far we can go with the sample. Like taking Nanika's example. So,
Yeah.
if we wanted to study the family dynamics due to lockdown, and someone mentioned that financial condition can also be one of the mediating factor or one of the reasons. So how far can we go with the sample? Like, can we go for a stratified sampling where we take people from lower SES and then from higher SES and then different age groups? Like, so I just feel that I just get very confused in terms of how far or how limited we should be with a sample
Beautiful.
in qualitative research.
Beautiful question, which leads me into a construct called saturation. There is a thing called sampling saturation and theoretical saturation. What does theoretical saturation mean? I know I'm putting the cart before the horse. We would have talked about it later, but let me just address it right now. So then this is why it is such a rigorous, long drawn out approach. It's a long drawn out study because you continue to collect data till you come to a point where further data does not add any value or meaning to what already you have in your hand. Okay, so you're looking at that stage where you're approaching data saturation. All theorists, all researchers want to approach data saturation, and that is at that. And if you're doing it not in a sloppy way, but if you're doing it in a rigorous way, okay, in a very robust way, you are going to want to reach a stage where further data does not add anything of value. What is data? Through interviews. So if you're not satisfied with the data that you already have, it is opening up new areas. You're still not satisfied. You say there's something else happening here that I want to explore. You continue to collect data, continue to do more interviews till you get to that point of data saturation. So I don't know whether that answers your question or poses more questions in your head. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Siddhi.
Because I feel that there can never be saturation in terms of, like, most of the psychological topics. Like, I don't think so there can ever be a saturating point, because like if I want to study family dynamics and maybe I'm satisfied with the data that I've collected from Delhi, so I want to go beyond Delhi and understand how there are different state dynamics. And once I'm done with state dynamics, maybe I want to understand how country dynamics impacted. So what is that point of saturation as a researcher
There
for
is
me?
very, very good point. And the point you're raising is there is no such thing as absolute saturation.
Yeah.
Which means totally infinite. That beyond that, to kuch hai nahi. You never reach that point. It's a limitless, it's a bottomless well. You can continue to keep doing search, but you'll be in a doctoral program for the rest of your life. So you start your think about this, starting a doctoral program in your 20s and ending up at 60 or beyond, still doing your doctorate. How would that feel? Of course, they won't allow you to be there in the program for that long, but if they allowed you, how would it feel to be in a doctoral program for 40 some years? That is I'm just trying to be facetious here. I mean, I am trying to make a point that it's a long, rigorous process. So you have to be prepared for really going very, very deep into the phenomenon. Okay. So does anybody else have anything to say before I go into the next one?
We have one more hand raised, which is Arhama.
Okay. Arhama,
Yes,
go ahead,
sir.
please.
Sir, I have a follow-up question with this one that was just that we just discussed. So, sir, like you said, there's no absolute saturation while we are doing grounded theory. So, why
Right.
is there a concept of saturation in qualitative research then?
Okay,
If there is no
because
absolute saturation.
because all human beings have a breaking point. Okay, and if your research chair, your committee chair is beating upon you and saying, or allow data, or allow data, or allow. At one point, you're going to raise your hand. You're going to say, if you ask me for more data, I'm going to squeeze your neck, or I'm going to drop out of the program totally. So when we say data saturation, you're looking at only your data from the standpoint of the data that you're doing, from the standpoint of the process that you're following and the structure you're following, which is a scientific structure. You feel that more interviews are not adding anything of it. The same thing is being repeated, Arama. You get my point? The same stuff is coming, but in a different way. So at that point, you know that any further interviews are not going to add value to the data. And that's what we call as data saturation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I have another question. Actually, when you were explaining abduction, it stated that the simplest explanation or something like that it was saying. So I was thinking this question just popped up in my mind. Can it somehow be equated with Occam's razor that states that the simplest explanation is the best explanation and that is the most plausible explanation? Can it just occurred in my mind, so I thought I'll just ask you, sir.
Now, I don't know, maybe you will have to take a Zoom session on that because I'm not familiar with that. But if you are seeing something connecting there, then it could be that. There could be a phenomena. I'm sure there's a phenomena that the simplest is sometimes the best. Okay. And the more you simplify things, right, the more simplified it gets, but it also gets so simple as to become complex. Right. So there are many ways of looking at the whole thing. All right.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Yes, sir.
But thank you, Arama, for asking that question. That's very nice. I appreciate that. So anybody else who wants to talk about this?
We have 2 more people, but I'm not sure how we're doing on time. So just wanted to be mindful of that.
Yeah. That is what I want to be, because I get carried away with these such interesting topics and we may not be able to cover that. We have a lot of material to cover. Okay. So we can.
Sidney asking for questions, but it's up to you if you'd like to take them.
Because I would. We'll see. Time permitting.
Sure.
Was that Siddhi? Siddhi wanted to ask?
Siddhi and Iman, both.
Iman, okay.
Both
So
have their hands.
time permitting, at the end, if we have a segment of time, we can take individual questions. And the way I broke it down with Nanika, right? We can break it down in that way. Okay, to construct.
Keep your questions with you.
Just keep your questions parked, and then we'll see. We'll try to see if we can approach it. Thank you for Kanika for that timekeeping. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So grounded theory concepts. Unlike traditional methodologies, grounded theory does not begin with an existing theoretical, meta-theoretical framework or design. So you do not start. You start with almost like a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa, RASA. Okay, don't ask me where that expression comes from, but it means a blank slate. It means almost like an infant's mind, which has not been written upon yet. Okay, and it's difficult to conceive of an infant's mind, but think of it approaching that with no preconceived notions, no existing theoretical, meta-theoretical frameworks. But then the question comes up, if I don't have any of those things in mind, how do I know what I want to research? Because if you know what you want to research, clearly you've read up about that. You have some knowledge about that topic. All right. So it's a paradoxical thing. All right. You know about something because you've read about something. But if you've read about something, it may color your vision of what is it that you're trying to do. So you have to, it's both and. You have to hold that paradox in your mind. But more importantly, do not allow those methodologies, Do not allow those theoretical frameworks to interfere in your inquiry. You're starting with a blank slate almost, right? Everything emerges from the data. We are repeating that. The researcher does not start with a bibliography. This typically comes last after the data has been collected. So those of you that have not done research or don't know what a study means, or don't know what a doctoral dissertation means, or a doctoral or master's dissertation, you know, you typically start with introduction as your chapter 1. Chapter 2 becomes literature review, where you're asked to review the literature around your phenomena. Where are the conversations happening around your phenomena? And how are those conversations connecting with your research question? Okay, not just any conversation happening. Conversations happening around your research area, okay? So this typically comes last after the data has been. So in grounded theory, you tend to bring that literature back in at the end. You then go in depth to do the literature review. Why? Here is a question that I want to ask some of the people. Why would you want to go at the end and collect the literature when you don't, when it's telling you do not collect the literature beforehand? So why even later on? What's the point? Anybody?
Basically to draw comparisons between the existing literature and what you have gained from your data or resource.
Yes, very nice. Because at the end of the game, what you're trying to ascertain is that you have done your best to study your phenomena. Okay, and let us say you have developed a new theory or refined the existing theory. Until you go into the literature around your phenomena, you're not going to know whether this was already attempted by somebody, or is it something brand new that you've created. Correct? So there is that importance of going into the literature at that point to satisfy yourself that you've exhausted your search, and nobody has written about that in the way that you're conceptualizing it, in the way that you're connecting the dots, in the way that you're creating a process or creating a refinement of an existing theory. And then once you're satisfied, you have to be able to show the citations, okay, to your committee, because they will push back and say, show us everything. What did you do in your search? What did you find? Tell us about it. Now, let us say you found something a little similar, but not quite the same, Sonali. So you were researching data on, let's say, emotional aggression or microaggression or something of that nature, right? And you found somebody, and you were looking at it from a different standpoint, from a different perspective, but somebody already has written about it in the literature, not exactly the way you have, but in a somewhat similar way. Then in your study, you have to create a linkage between what it is that you are finding, which is so innovative, so creative, as opposed to what somebody else had written earlier. So then you draw that comparison between what was already existing in the literature and what is emerging from your study, and to make a conversation between that. So a good research is an analytic research. A good discussion is an analytic discussion where you analyze. That's the scholarly part of research, where you have developed a conversation between what somebody has written and what you've written, and why yours is different, not necessarily superior than that, but why is your approach, why are your process that you're developing a better, it's a refinement on what was already written. And then as a good scholar, you credit the work that has been written, that has been done by somebody, and say that I am making an attempt to add more meaning, more clarity to that. That is the sign of a good scholar. You don't go and rebut, that is all trash. My theory is the best. you'll never be able to be accepted in the Academy of Scholars. In the Academy of Scholars, it's a discourse happening. This is not a personal fight occurring between people. Okay. All right. Does that answer your question, Sonali?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we've talked about that. Let's go to the next one. All right. All right. You'll hear these expressions, categories, coding, constant coding, memoing, sampling, theoretical sampling, all of that kind of stuff you're going to hear. And I made some notes that I wanted to clarify for you also, so that you don't get confused between some of these things. Okay. All right. So let's talk about categories. What are categories? It's the grouping together of instances, events, processes, and occurrences that share central features. So think of categories as emergent themes. Everybody has heard about emergent themes. When we were talking about thematic analysis, we talked about emergence, themes that share common characteristics. So look at those as, and for the purpose of grounded theory. So now remember, in different methodologies, you use different terminologies. You're expected to as a scholar. You will not call them emergent themes in grounded theory, but you would call them categories. The grouping together of instances, events, processes, and occurrences. Categories may be, now, even before you go into a category, and later in the presentation, I'll show you how certain expressions pop up in the transcripts, in the interviews. And at that first blush, you think that there is no correlation between them. But when you list them together, you start to realize that they have a relationship with each other. Okay? Now here's what occurs. Categories may be at a lower or higher level of abstraction. So think of, and I'll clarify that a little bit later in the slide, but think of emergent themes that are occurring, right? Resistance to authority, difficulty with holding paradox, difficulty with containing anger, dysfunctional ways of behaving, difficulty in relationship with your bosses, or there can be a variety of factors. So what are lower or higher level of abstraction? So the same thing you could be looking at as either being at a lower level of abstraction or a higher level of abstraction. The low abstraction categories serve as descriptive labels. Remember, in categories and coding, there is a descriptive or interpretative level. So expressions that talk about such as anger, pity, resistance, or compassion and things of that nature. They are just descriptive labels that have been assigned to a category. So you're simply looking at that and saying, this is occurring in the transcript. This is what is coming in the transcript. But that doesn't tell you how it is being interpreted in the text, in your transcript. So the moment you look for something different by way of abstraction, look for more analytic, which is interpretative, you are trying to look for something. So it's just saying, oh, there was a lot of anger, or there was a lot of pity, or there was a lot of resonance, or there was a lot of whatever, doesn't tell you a lot. What do you mean by that? What is your interpretation as a researcher of anger, pity, or whatever? So the moment you interpret a label which was descriptive in nature, which is right here, I'm putting the cursor here, such as anger, pity, etc., you go into a higher abstraction category, which is analytic in nature. So this is a process that flows from description to analysis. And then you may go back from analysis back to description, because you may look at that again and say, can I put a different analytical framework around that? Can I interpret that same thing, which I thought was there was a lot of anger because of the oppression of the bosses, or because of the authoritarian bosses that we have within the organization. Is that why there was anger? Or was that anger occurring because of the inability to contain that frustration within the organization? That there were no parameters there, there were no mechanisms there. Like, for instance, if you don't have good peer relationship with your workers, you may not be able to talk about that in a way that becomes productive. So look at those two, and I know this will be very complex without examples. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time that I can go into specific examples and show you that. But if you look at the readings that I will provide, it'll show you a lot more by what I mean about lower abstraction and higher abstraction. Just please know, for the sake of this discussion, that there is a lower abstraction, which is descriptive, higher abstraction is interpretative, okay? So coding is a process by which categories are identified and divided into low and high categories, which we just talked. So what we just discussed, creating out of categories these low abstraction and high abstraction, low abstraction meaning descriptive, higher abstraction meaning interpretative, is called coding. Okay, you'll hear of coding in phenomenology also. So has a slightly different context and meaning there. In analysis of data, descriptive labels are initially attached to low categories, which I just said, emotions, anxiety, etc. As analysis progresses, as you're going deeper into it, coding, which is this grouping between high and low categories, identifies data that share characteristics of higher abstraction, where interpretation of labels can begin, such as, what does the anxiety represent to you, to the organization? Now, if your research phenomena was around you, it was a more individual thing, you would want to wonder, what does the anxiety mean to you personally? But if it is an organizational phenomena that you're exploring, then you're exploring, what does the anxiety mean for the organization? And what ramifications is that kind of uncontained anxiety, anger, frustration in the employees having on organizational profits, let's say, or organizational morale, let's say, or the way other stakeholders from outside your organization, as in shareholders and others, viewing what is happening within the organization. So there's an unrest, there's a turbulence that is going on within the organization. Okay. Constant comparative analysis. You'll hear that in the context of grounded theory. So a coding process that maintains momentum by going back and forth between convergences and divergences. So as you're coding, once again, coding is higher level of abstraction, lower levels of abstraction. You're going, this is an entire process you're following. It maintains a momentum by going back and forth between convergences and divergences. It's important to understand, especially in grounded theory, how are people's ideas converging or agreeing? Another way of saying convergence is agreeing. And how are they disagreeing? So both factors come into play. It's a dialogue that's happening within the organization. And what it's not just important to say, okay, some people are agreeing with this, some people are disagreeing with it. The question is why? Why is there so much agreement and disagreement around the same phenomena? As a researcher, that is where your role is to dig deeper into it, to try to find out what are the connections that are happening there. Okay? And why is this disconnect between agreement and disagreement? And is there a way that this agreement and disagreement could be resolved? Okay, because that is what you're also trying to do. You're trying to build a theoretical framework. You're not just identifying a process, by the way, folks. The end result of a grounded theory, remember, unlike phenomenology, which is about exploring the essence of a phenomenon, grounded theory is you are going to be called upon to contribute something major to the literature that refines a theory or creates a new theory. So the people are going to turn to you for solutions. That's why this whole process becomes so tedious and complicated. So it ensures that the researcher is not only accumulating categories, which are, again, categories are, think of them as emergent themes, but also categorizing them into subunits. We are, remember, and I believe it was Arama who said that, you know, we take these things and make them simpler. The idea is to create a subunit. Why do we create a subunit? Why do we create a subgroup? Because it's easier to manage data in a subunit or a subgroup than it is in the larger corpus. So you're trying to understand these smaller units of meaning. What do these smaller units of meaning represent to you, okay, as a researcher? The goal is not to get into a homogeneous mindset, means everything now can be painted with the same brush. So you're not trying to homogenize your mindset, homogenize the data, but allowing complexity, sorry, to make its way into emergent theory. So you are allowing a great deal. On the one hand, you're trying, so here's the paradoxical part. On the one hand, you're trying to simplify things. On the other hand, you're trying to introduce complexity. So now here, let me pause and let me ask you, why is it important to both simplify and introduce complexity into creating this type of analysis?
We had someone who raised hand, but now I can't see anyone there. I'm not sure what happened.
Because this is a very important part in grounded theory. On the one hand, you're simplifying. On the other hand, you're bringing in complexity. Where is this complexity coming from?
Mitakshara.
Go ahead, Mitakshara.
So I believe that no phenomenon can be straightforward, cannot be explained in a straightforward way. Every phenomenon has richness to it, different dynamics to it. So in that way, we are introducing different dynamics, but also simplifying them for people to understand.
Okay, okay. All right.
Apurva?
So possibly when we are categorizing, we are basically simplifying because we are just dividing into categories. But when we are, but then when we are kind of raising the level of abstraction and trying to see patterns and interpreting them, that is where I think the complexity comes in the interpretation, because the categorizing may make it simple, because when you're putting them into buckets, that is like simplifying how we look at it.
So correct. So let me give you an example. So there's a glass of water. It was a plain glass of water. Here it is, my water. And as you collect data, as you put data, think of the data as different colors. As you collect data and put it into this glass, the glass starts to become colored. It could either become red or blue or green or whatever, depending upon different variety, different kinds of data that you're putting into it for the purpose of analysis. Now, when you create subunits, you are actually, in a way, cleaning this glass of its colors, not of its richness, by the way. Not the richness. Think of colors as creating more and more complexity into it, okay? Because it's a colored view, it's a colored perspective, it's a colored idea. And you are trying to make sense. You're not trying to say that that is bad, but you're trying to create subunits so that you can tackle that in a better way. So then as you do that, the glass again starts to become clean, correct? The water starts to become more transparent. So you're simplifying it. On the other hand, remember I talked about iteration, going back and forth? Because you're going back, not that you just don't stop there, you go back into the data again, or as new data comes up, as new interviews come up, again, you're adding more into it. So again, so point I'm trying to make is, it's an iterative process. It's a process of repetition. It's not one size fits all that, you know, it's all clear now or all muddy. You have to have both holding together. So the goal, if you were into a homogeneous mindset, you would be satisfied with the glass being red, because now you've got all the richness, everything is in there, and I'm going to stop. So you're creating a homogeneous research endeavor. And nothing is further from the truth when you talk about grounded theory. You allow as much complexity to make it into its way into the emergent theory. Because if your theory has to be rich, it has to be robust, it has to be rigorous, you have to allow more and more complexity to come into it. So I guess I've beaten that into the ground. Anybody wants to add something real quick to that? Apurva wanted to say something?
Apurva just mentioned, he shared his point.
Okay, Apurva just shared his point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anybody else?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, like, I have this little question that what's the difference between themes and categories? Like, how do we create the both? I'm a bit confused with both. Like,
Okay,
how do we create
think of
both and how do we create categories?
I'll make it simple for you. In grounded theory, think of the categories as emergent themes.
Okay.
And coding is the process of separating higher levels of abstraction from lower levels of abstraction. Coding is a more analytical process.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So think of categories as emergent themes. Okay. All right. So let me proceed. Okay. Just 1 second here. All right. So the negative case analysis and theoretical sensitivity. Now you're going to hear more concepts here. Researcher immerses in the data and looks for negative cases. What are negative cases? Not as in negative or positive. That's not where this connotation comes from. It is categories that do not fit. Now, Sonali, you just said categories, right? So the categories are emergent themes. So you're looking for, in your data, you're looking for emergent themes that do not somehow fit into this framework. Fit into what? They are not fitting into the research that you're doing. And what are you doing the research on? Your research phenomena. And from the research phenomena, there was a research question or hypothesis that you formed. Right? So it is not fitting in. So these are negative cases. Negative means they are not necessarily aligned or relevant to the research phenomena. These instances are identified and explicated in the analysis. So just because you see something that is not fitting in, you don't throw it out and say this has got no bearing on the research. In grounded theory, whatever is not fitting in, and those of you that are students of math will know when you're doing the dispersion analysis, there are outliers, things that lie outside. There are not that all the dots are lying outside. And we call them outliers, L-I-E-R-S. Okay, not L-I-A-R-S. Okay, so these themes that are not fitting in have to be explicated. They have to be discussed in your analysis. All right, perhaps from the idea that so for instance, if you're talking about something and you're giving something richness, you don't just look at the positives of that. You also look at the negatives of that. Negative as in what is not contributing to that. Because you want to do justice to the phenomenon. All right. So likewise, in grounded theory, you discuss both. The researcher interacts with the data in order to identify low and high abstractions, which I told you earlier. Descriptive labels versus interpretative labels. Coding them into additional categories while remaining sensitive to the process. So now, again, this gets muddies the water. So you are creating higher abstractions, lower abstractions through coding. Then you're creating additional categories, additional groupings of those themes while remaining sensitive to the process. Sensitivity to the process is you're staying with the rigor. You're doing the iteration, doing the back and forth, doing the repetition in order to find if there's anything else you're missing there or anything else that might contribute to the phenomenon. Okay. So theoretical sampling and theoretical saturation. So sampling involves collecting further data in analysis so that the emerging theories can be challenged. We all know what sampling is, and purposive sampling means you're purposefully recruiting people who can say something with authority about what you're discussing or what you're researching. This is a stage of refinement and transparency with the goal of reaching data and theory saturation. Remember, I talked about theory saturation? You keep bringing more in with the idea. It is a very deliberate process, not a random process. Oh, I'm going to bring 10 more interviews or 20 more. Because I woke up this morning, 20 is a good number, so I'm going to bring 20 more or 30 more or 40 more. That's not it. It's a deliberate, conscious process of adding more data so that you're bringing in the complexity and you're bringing in also the richness to the study. Saturation occurs when no new categories meaning emergent themes, can be identified. It is only a goal. So right now, this is in line with what somebody had spoken, and I forget who had said, that there is no such thing as an infinite because it will continue to go on. And I think it was Mitakshara who said that. When no new categories can be identified, it is only a goal, but not reality. For any modification changes will inevitably call for additional data, which may yield new material. So it's a never-ending cycle. But at some point, you have to stop and say, you have done your best. Your further searches are not yielding any more data that is helping this. So at that point, you stop and you say that you have collected enough data for the study. All right, now, this is a research design framework, okay? All right, so if you look at the theoretical sensitivity on the one hand, memoing on the other hand, purposive sampling. Let's look at this blue here. Okay. Purposive sampling, all these arrows that flowing down from the top to bottom, okay? Right? So what is purposive sampling? Purposive sampling means sampling with a purpose. What is sampling? It's recruiting participants or recruiting data. Now, you might wonder how can you recruit data? Well, you collect data. You collect data through interview, focus interviews, so questionnaires, so whatever the case may be. Like, remember, we were talking about content analysis, which is a highly objective process, which can be quantifiable. So likewise, you may collect data from many sources because the data also can be analyzed by you. It's not just an interview as in a semi-structured in-depth interview. Although that is the predominant focus there, but you can also collect data from many different sources. So purposive sampling goes through generating, collecting data. You could do survey, see my cursor here, interviews, focus groups, other data, other forms of data, to repositories, initial coding. So you start to group the data through lower categories, higher categories. See that? Initial coding, and category identification. So what is the process of coding? Is the process of breaking it down into lower and higher categories That's what we mean by category identification. Intermediate coding, selecting core categories, data saturation. So as you're progressing, you're going deeper and deeper. That's why it's going from the top to bottom, because you're going deeper. They didn't put grounded theory at the top, they put it at the bottom. Advanced coding, storyline, theoretical coding. This is going into more complexity. And then you finally reach grounded theory here in the blue. Now, theoretical sampling, and I put some notes here because theoretical sampling is a little bit more complex, and nobody's a genius here, including me, so I had to also refer to this. So theoretical sampling is a process of data collection for generating theory. It jointly collects codes and analyzes data. So what you're trying to do is you're doing, now this was just data that is coming through the interviews, but is that all there is to it? You are trying to do what? What is your purpose in grounded theory? To develop a new theory or to refine an existing theory. So now the theoretical sensitivity means you are looking at this data and you're seeing how this data talks theoretically. Now remember, not that, and please be clear, you're not looking at this data and saying, oh, Darwin wrote about this earlier, so therefore this is how this connects with this data. That is not your purpose. You are looking at theoretical sensitivity from the standpoint of what new theoretical framework is appearing here. Or if a theory is appearing, what is that theory that is appearing there? Or is it a refinement on an existing theory? So you're capturing what is happening through that analysis, all right? And we call that the theoretical sensitivity, all right? And you see if it's flowing into that, into generating, collecting data, into initial coding, and all of that stuff. So it is a process that is flowing. And if you notice, these arrows are going back and forth, okay? These arrows are going down, but these arrows are also going up, flowing into this. This arrow is flowing into this. So if for intermediate coding may have to go back to generating, collecting data again. Initial coding may have to go back to generating, collecting data again, right? And all of this process is all integrating into each other. Memoing, now interesting one is memoing. What are memoing? Data are building blocks. So think of memos. I like this analogy that I found. So memos in grounded theory, I think of building blocks, right? So the data that you're getting are like the bricks, building blocks of a building, correct? But if you put all the building blocks together, can you erect a building? No, you have to have something that joins those blocks together. What is that? Something that joins it's mortar or cement or whatever, right? So something that holds those pieces together, okay? So when you're doing memoing, you're creating these building blocks, and memos are the mortar or reflective interpretation processes. So as you are looking and doing this data analysis, you're making your own notes, you're making your own observations. That is the glue that is going to hold these things together, because you could be doing all of this and not doing this, all right? And you're going to be in trouble. Because what about your observations, your rich notes? Those are holding it together. So if you notice from memoing, it is also flowing back through constant comparative. What is constant comparative analysis? Going back and forth, right? Look for negative cases, convergences, divergences, and be able to separate them together, but separate them, and then be able to talk about the negative aspects in a way that you're creating more complexity into this. You're looking at it from all perspectives or from newer lenses, okay? So this is just a, and by the way, it's an online paper, and I will send you all the link to that. It's on the internet. You can look up, and it's very nicely done, nicely described, much better than the way I have described, because I've obviously extracted it from their article, okay? And the references at the end of this presentation. So under the references section. So let's see. Now, another thing that you're going to hear a lot about is axial coding. A lot of times I'm doing grounded theory workshops, and they can't wait to know what is axial coding. I think it's something to do with the axial, right? That people are so fascinated about. The coding, as I said, is a grouping between categories, right? Low categories, high categories, as I talked about. But axial coding, it's group open codes into categories. Open codes into important categories will emerge. So for example, let's say from a transcript, right? The open codes were scoping, explanation, problem statement, suggested solution, right? Okay, do you see that there's a process here? Scoping, explanation, problem statement, suggested solution. Possible categories, if you were to do the actual coding, possible categories could be presentation and discussion. After all this stuff is about presentation and discussion. So what they've done is they've simplified, unpacked these 4 boxes into possible categories. Presentation and discussion. So if you go to the next one, overlapping categories indicate the need for refinement. So now, presentation and discussion. Right. So, okay. So presentation and discussion, yeah, okay, I can see that. Like we are having, I'm presenting, and you guys are discussing, putting your questions there, right? So we are doing somewhat something similar. But if you were to look at these 2 and put an expression around that to define, not necessarily define, to put a word that sums up both presentation and discussion into something more macro, it would be under the rubric of communication techniques. Because isn't presentation about a communication technique? Isn't what I'm communicating because of a technique I have, because of my individual novel approach? Isn't the questions that you folks are asking me also follow a certain style? You follow there's an intelligence there, there's an insightfulness there, there's a poignancy there in your questions. Because the richer your questions, the more I have to think and put together my thoughts. So that is the process of refinement. So it is all happening under communication techniques, correct? So that is what we call axial coding, okay? Just remember that. And as you read the article, you can, and if you go into the internet, there's hundreds of articles on grounded theory, and I will send you the ebook, probably Glaser and Strauss, the original ebook in its own total form that you can read. It's somewhat dense, the text in certain parts, but it's also quite easy to understand. Okay, so what is the tentative nature of grounded theory research? This is a question that often comes up. Okay, and I'm just seeing the time. Okay, we're doing well for time. There is something very, you might say, so if I've spent 5 years in this doctoral study, breaking my head on this proverbial research wall and dealing with all the egos of my committee members, and I've come up with this thing, I'm all ready to roll. I can't wait to earn my stripes so I can call myself PhD or MPhil or whatever. Stop. Wait a second. Let us together read this. This is from Glaser and Strauss in 1967. These are the originators, by the way, of grounded theory, the founders. When generation of theory is the aim, isn't that our aim? We are generating new theories or refining existing theories. One is constantly alert to emergent perspectives. So while you are developing, it's not that you're sitting in a silo and that the world around you has come to a stop. Nobody else is allowed to do any research on your phenomena anywhere in the world, because guess what? Arama doing her research on grounded theory, the whole world has to stop. Is that possible? People are doing their research, they're continuing research, probably on your phenomena itself. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands of researchers, MPhil students, doctoral students, postdocs that are going back to school. So if generational theory is the aim, one is constantly alert to emergent perspectives. So emergent means new perspectives are coming up, new ideas, new thoughts are coming up. This will change and help develop the theory. It could be the same theory that Arhama is looking at, that others are also looking at. So you cannot be looking at your theoretical perspectives in a vacuum. You have to consider other perspectives too, which is novel about grounded theory. These perspectives can easily occur on the final day of study, final day when you're ready to hang up your gloves. It is going for proofreading now, and I am done. Ever you start doing your happy dance. My PhD is done. Okay, I'll soon be getting the letters after my name. These perspectives can easily occur on the last day or when the manuscript is reviewed in page proof, which is proofreading. You know, it goes through proofreading before it can be finally submitted to the repository. What is the repository? The repository is the ProQuest or UMI, where your doctoral dissertation is going to reside. So the published word is not the final one. Very, very critical here to remember the published words. Published word means whatever you are publishing is not the final word, but only a pause in the never-ending process of generating theory. I'm sort of getting goosebumps just thinking about that, the excitement of that, emotional excitement of that. But on the other hand, the apprehension that I've done all this grunt work, and now I'm still not there yet. Relax, guys. Your dissertation will be done. It will be accepted when you have entered in a scholarly discourse around that and brought everything that you possibly could from the world of literature and developed a discourse around what you are doing and what they're doing and how yours may be different or not different. Nobody's going to go and say, hey, go back and now redo the 5 years. Relax. You are going to earn your stripes. You're going to earn your PhD or MPhil. Don't worry about it. But you have to be a rigorous scholar. So this is talking about the tentative nature of grounded theory, which you have to keep in mind. All right. That's why this is a very powerful slide, and I keep it towards the latter part. This is the references I talked about. There are two main references I referred to in this presentation. Remember, when you're talking about references, you don't give 100 references and you only refer to 2 in your study. In a study, you're required. Now, there's a thing called references and there's a thing called bibliography. Let me also share with you the meaning, the difference between references and bibliography. References mean only the items, the theorists, the citations that you referred to in your work. This is all the work that I showed you, all attributed to these folks. Okay, I've got some, and of course my presentation was my own ideas, but they're all ideas collected and organized, you know, based on the thinking of others as well. That's what scholarly discourse is, scholarly seminars are. But when you do bibliography, you are not only making reference to the references, but you're also making those 98 other citations, which tangentially or directly or indirectly speak to that, but you never got a chance to cover that. You did not paraphrase them, you did not cite them in your study, you did not bring them into your study in a deliberate way. Okay? So just so you remember. Now, we'll go back to the beginning, and here's where I will request, open it up for, we've got 15-20 minutes, and I'd like to open the forum up for any conversations, any ideas, any thoughts. I know it's a long 2 hours, but we have waited so long, we could wait for another 15 minutes and share your thoughts, because I'm sure that a lot of thoughts have emerged in you, okay, that you would like to talk about.
We have Siddhi raising her hand. Siddhi, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Siddhi, please.
Yeah. Mute yourself.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to know that saturation, from where I see it, is a very subjective, it's a very subjective thing to do. I mean, maybe after I have done 7 interviews or 8 interviews, I feel that I had enough of the phenomenon. Like I have studied enough, and whatever I am getting next is just a repetition, but it's my subjective understanding. So how can we reduce biasness when it comes to saturation?
Okay, so I almost chuckled when I heard Siddhi say that, because it was almost a Freudian slip. She said, I've had enough of the phenomena. You're telling your advisors, sir, I've had enough. No, I'm just kidding. So yes, you are right, it's subjective. But Siddhi, it is also objective. You can say subjectively, okay, I've done 5, I brought 5 more interviews, now I'm done. But there's an objective process too. You have to see, okay, after 5, were you so tired that you couldn't bring any more? Or couldn't you find anything more? So yes, it is subjective. It is your decision. Nobody is putting a gun to the head and saying that you have not gotten to data, because data saturation for you, maybe data saturation not, so saturation of data for you may be different from saturation of data by Kanika, maybe different from Mitakshara, different from Arama. Every person's own idea, notions of data saturation are different. My notion of data saturation may be totally different. It also is how exhausted you are in the process, that you feel any more data that you collect is not going to be of value to you. So yes, you are totally right. It is subjective, but also remember it is also objective. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I have a request to make. So is it possible that we can have a follow-up session on this? Because I have a lot like this, I've taken in a lot from this session, but I really want to reflect upon it, and I want to study upon it and figure out how, what are the doubts that come around it. So can we have a follow-up session on this?
Yeah, okay. So Kanika, if you want to make a note of that.
Yeah.
Right? Follow-up session on this, on grounded theory. It may not happen very soon because I've got a zillion things going on, but we will keep it in mind, and we will develop another follow-up session where we will go into actual studies, actual illustrative studies on that, okay? Which means not the concepts now. Concepts you all are clear on. But how do you take something as a phenomena and then actually do a doctoral study on it, or a master's study on that, right? And then we will hopefully answer some of your questions through that. But thank you so much. I'm glad that it stirred up something for you that you want to take more, So we have Siddhi Goel, right?
Yeah. So Anya, we don't have any raised hands as of now. At least I can't see, but I have my chat box open in front of me. And
I have.
Yeah, just
to interrupt you, I just have one more thing to add over here. So when you said, when you were talking about the last slide, and you said this last line struck you and you had goosebumps. So why did you say that? Could you just tell us about like what
Okay,
is it
the
about that
goosebumps.
last line
So which one,
instructive? Yes, sir.
which last line was that? Which one that was here about
This
that?
one, sir. I think it was something like a
This one?
pause. The final word that we have is just a pause in the
Ah,
never-ending
pause,
process
because
of
pause
generating
is
theory.
so
Yes, sir.
pause is so critical in research. We don't pause. We are going like lightning trains. We are going like jaldi se khatam ho jaye. You have to hold on lightly. I'm so glad you asked that question. If you hold on too tightly to your views, to your own theories, to your own paradigms, you are not going to open yourself up to rigorous research. So that gave me goosebumps because it reminded me of so many times in my workshops when I will find at least one student who is totally gung-ho about her ideas and her ideas alone, and she's challenging everybody in the class. She's challenging me, putting doubts in my mind around what it is. And I tell her, I kept saying, Kiran, take it easy, hold on lightly. She said, I don't care. I'm convinced that this is the way it is. I said, convinced based on what? Can you provide citations? Can you provide references of what you're saying? She said, well, no, but I've read about it. I said, we all have read, but you're a scholar, you're doing your PhD at a prominent institute. If your faculty members are going to ask you on the committee to provide some citations, when are you going to provide citations? Or I'm just going to say, oh, it's an intuition, it's a hunch. Hunches don't work. This is no place for hunches and intuitions. Yes, if you have a hunch or intuition, provide the citation, that's how you rebut. That's how you rebut and stand up and bring your scholarly voice there. And you can't have a scholarly voice, forget about this. Forget about research. Research is not about intuition. It's evidence-based. Okay, so I got a, so I'm glad Arana is asking me about my goosebumps. Why did I get goosebumps? This is a good thing. So the pause is the never-ending process of generating theory. You see, I'm a bit of a poet. Everything has to appeal to me poetically. Okay, that's why I'm so drawn to phenomenology and to John Keats. But thank you for asking that. Anybody else?
We had a couple of points and questions that
Nanika has just raised her hand. Her hand went up. Nanika.
Yes, sir. My question was, how is grounded theory deductive?
Okay. So first of all, grounded theory is
I understood the inductive part.
Yeah.
But
no,
you said that it's both.
I did not say that grounded theory is deductive per se. What I said was grounded theory data can be collected both inductively and deductively. It can use both inductive and deductive. That is why in grounded theory also we have both thematic analysis and content analysis.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm glad.
You got it? Okay.
I'm glad,
Right.
Nanika, you asked that, because the points that were there in the chat box that I was trying to ask were from Aprajita and Farzan, and
Yes.
those were about. So Aprajita had asked was, if we are refining another theory, isn't it going to be deductive? And Farzan's point was, but in grounded theory, most of time we explore more things from culture. That is through inductive approach. So, that's again alluding to the deductive and the inducting.
Correct.
Inductive.
So don't get confused.
Yeah.
There is no hard and fast. The one thing you learn in qualitative research, there is no hard and fast rules. There is no boilerplate to go on. Like in quantitative is a boilerplate, is very statistics, mathematics, graphs, charts, figures, numbers, all numerics. Here we are non-numerical data. All right. So when you say deduction, it's how you look at a process. Yeah, you could have a deductive approach to analyzing it, but that doesn't make grounded theory a deductive approach. So don't get confused. It's a philosophy of research. See, whenever you're picking a method, you're looking at the philosophy of the the philosophy, underlying philosophy of that, the methodology that you're going to use, and the design that you're going to use. So all three are the pillars when you're creating a study. Philosophy is very important. So it has a inductive philosophy, just the way phenomenology has an inductive philosophy. Now within that, sometimes a technique you may be using or data collection you may be using may be a deductive approach. But that doesn't make the methodology inductive or deductive. Okay? Anyone else, or anybody else in the chat that we have not answered?
No. Just a thought from Sonali. Thank you, sir. Both the sessions were very insightful, really triggered our minds. So now there are some thank you notes, but no questions really or thoughts that are coming up.
Okay.
And we don't have raised hands. Yeah.
Good.
So,
good.
so
I'm glad. Go ahead, Mitakshara. Sorry.
So it's not exactly a question or a thought. It's more about. So you actually mentioned how even if some theory is similar to ours, it is supposed to. We are supposed to compare it, but not degrade it. We are supposed to give due credit. I just found it funny at that time because I read Glaser and Strauss as well as Sharma's work, and they have been criticizing each other like in depth in each other's work. So it's just a thought that crossed my mind.
Absolutely, and you will get more of that as you enter the world of academia. And I know Kanika is going to be entering that world soon. She already actually has entered because she's in this world. But when she starts to formally do it, you will notice the egos that happen there between the faculty members and between the theorists. One theorist will say this, another will say that. Okay, and so this is intellectual discourse. It is not getting at each other's throats. It is not personal. When Kathy Sharma's brought a constructivist approach to grounded theory, and she has become the leader in constructivism, okay,
Yes,
you do realize that she's not making it personal. She is academically questioning. It's an academic inquiry, academic controversy that is occurring. And that's what makes it beautiful. Of course, who stops you from challenging somebody's notions and saying, look, I feel this is the way it could be approached. But then you have to tell them, not just intuitively, I feel this is the way. Is there a different way of approaching? And perhaps if I look at it this way, because I'm finding some literature or I'm finding a new avenue, they'll be open to it. The best researchers are those that will enter into a dialogue with you, but they will not let you have a voice in the academy of scholars. If you're just going out there and putting your thoughts out there with no basis and no citations and things of that nature. So just keep that in mind. All right.
Yes.
So, all right. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Unless anybody has anything to say, I think we can wrap it up. Because I know it's been long.
Sorry, sir, for interrupting, but I just have one thing to say that I absolutely loved your session, sir. I absolutely loved it, and it's not easy. I am very on. I'm being very honest. I did. Get distracted for quite some time, but it was you made it engaging, and I also need to admit this that I did not really get all the concepts that you explained. So thank you for recording. I'll go back and watch the YouTube sessions and take down notes. And thank you for organizing this amazing session.
Thank you. And for those of you,
know.
yeah, and thank you,
yes,
thank you, Arama. You've been amazing, and your questions have been very poignant and insightful, and you've been a good listener. But for those that attended both sessions, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I know it's how difficult taking 4 hours out of your at nights. For me, it's the morning. The sun is not shining, but it's the morning. It's only 12 noon for me. But for you, a lot of you, most of you, it's nighttime. It's very late. And I know Arama sent me a private message saying that my nani is saying, are you still doing this? Are you not ticked off that at 9:30, quarter to 10, you're
yes,
saying this
yes.
at night?
My nanny was like, I was smiling throughout the entire at the end of the session, and she was like, what happened, Arama? Why are you smiling so much? It's 9:30. Like, it was almost 10 o'clock, and she was like, "Das bajra, and you're so smiling so much. I never saw you. I never saw you, doing classes so energetic
But
earlier."
also but the credit also goes. See, I can only be as good as the participants I have in the group. I could just be, otherwise I could be shouting from the rooftops. Nobody's listening. Nobody's participating. It may as well be a boring lecture where I go through all the slides and it's done, finished. This is, by the way, this is only to give you a broad brushed overview to actually trigger some thoughts in you, questions in you. I am by no means an expert. I'm learning as I'm going. That's why I have to make notes too, because we don't know everything there is to know. Right now, there's down the road, I want to do a session on ethnography versus ethnomethodology, which a lot of people think is the same. And actually we have to, so to be able to do that, I'll have to dig deep into my resources to create a session. So because every time I create a new session, I'm right, Kanika, I'm also learning something new that I didn't know before. So it's educating myself as well as, sharing the knowledge, expertise, and all that. So with that, I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. We are going to actually create a recording, and I will post it on my YouTube channel. I'll post the link on. I may not be able to send you an email, everybody, but if you go to the YouTube channel, you'll check on it. By tomorrow, it should be there. Tomorrow, your time, the video should be loaded there. So thanks again. Have a great evening, and thank you, Kanika, for holding the fort with me on both the sessions. It was amazing because it's so supportive of you to be able to take time out of your schedule also and contribute to us. So I appreciate that. And again, please all be safe, and this will continue. Okay, and those of you that I want to go deep into grounded theory, send a note to Kanika or to me or whoever, and then we can create a new group for you to be able to advance your learning into that. Okay? Because if the learning stops, then you stop. You have to continue on this path. If it intrigued you, then you have to go on this path to get it deeper into it. All right? So thanks again. Take care all, and good luck. Bye-bye.